which is basically composing while you're performing. Now, there may be a melody and a sequence of chord symbols on paper, but little of the music is actually written down. What you just heard, what we heard together, is 32 measures of music with an introduction and an interlude stretched into about 7 minutes, which is a great thing. You don't need to learn a lot of music in order to fill up the time and play the gig. It expands. There might be some of this written down, inscribed on paper, but little of it is actually nailed down. And as some of you have already kind of noted, this bewilders or can bewilder classically trained musicians who are often bound to the black dots on the page. Most jazz musicians are excellent readers of printed music. The trumpeter you just heard plays the bugle at Vernon Downs in upstate New York, the horse racing. He's the guy who puts on the top hat and comes out because a gig is a gig, and this is what he does. And he teaches at Hamilton College, and he teaches at Syracuse University. They're on the go a lot. They have to be able to play in a variety of settings to pay their bills. Yet for them, and this is critical, music is made, not written. A jazz musician reveals the truth that written music is a contradiction in terms. There is no such thing as written music. Music only exists by definition in the air. Now, some of this may be inscribed, but the point is, how do we get it into the air? And in Gail's work as a teacher of preachers, it's the same thing. A written sermon is a contradiction in terms. People will turn out or tune out the preacher if the preacher is not particularly good at presenting whatever they've prepared. So that's as much a part of it as anything else. So what are they doing? Interpretation. First of all, interpretation. They are taking something that they have worked up together, and then they're adding their personal spin to it. And a lot of this is learned by ear, even if the musicians are reading. They're picking up what works, what doesn't work. I was instructed after a decade or so of learning Bach two-part inventions and doing my piano such. I got a call by my high school band teacher to go play on a weekend in a smoky club. And he gave me a tip I've never forgotten. If you're playing a solo and you hit the wrong note, go down a half a step. And most likely it'll line up right where it needs to be. Now think about that. If I ever played the wrong note in a piano lesson and it was a Mozart piece, my teacher would have stopped me and pointed this out, say it's a G sharp, and then we would try it again. But in jazz, it is like hopping on a moving train. That's how one of my church members describes singing along with a jazz band at one of our annual jazz services. You're hopping onto a freight train that is already moving, and you better stay with it, or else it's gonna, well, you get the point. Years ago, I was with a group of ministers in New Orleans and went to Preservation Hall one night. It was a Sunday night, the late show. The crowd was boisterous. Leader of the band came out to greet us, and he said, "Sound like you are having a good time." He said, "But I bet you didn't go to church this morning." And the crowd kind of laughed in response. And he said, "Well, we're going to take you to church tonight," and then counted off just a closer walk with thee, the first of about a dozen or so familiar hymns. And the band kind of laid them on the audience, of course, concluding with "When the Saints Go Marching In." And the crowd was leaping off the seats or the benches, clapping, whooping, stomping, singing along. And there was this kind of sense that we had been raised from the dead. And as our group of clergy stumbled back to our rooms on South Rampart Street after midnight, one of them proclaimed, "I've never heard church music like that." It had been interpreted. Another thing that the musicians are doing, they're inventing. And this is why it's hard sometimes if you only kind of dip in occasionally to listen to some jazz. You might think, this is not what I thought I was going to be listening to. This is a tradition of music. It surges forward like a mighty river with a lot of tributaries. Since the beginnings in the early 1900s, jazz has evolved in stages, and then roughly about every 10 or 15 years. Traditional jazz became syncopated popular songs, which became swing music, which then was answered during World War II by bebop. West Coast jazz softened the fury of bebop, and then hard bop came back with roots and amen chords igniting some fire. And then the rock and roll kind of seeped into the hard bop while the civil rights struggle in America raised cries for freedom and justice. And then the bossa nova craze flew in from Rio de Janeiro, while symphony conductors began to welcome occasionally an improviser to join them on stage. And while musicians plugged into amplifiers, there became an electronic fusion which threatened to burn down the arena. And when this whole decentralized tradition nearly devolved into chaos, pianist Keith Jarrett would sit down in European concert halls to create 90-minute long concerts of spontaneously created piano music. It's all jazz, the whole kit and caboodle. And the tradition is still becoming something new. There's invention at the heart of this. One of the paragons of this is the trumpeter Miles Davis, who participated in many of those developmental stages. He refused ever to stay in one place, pressing on and breaking ground, and his bands were constantly changing. If you went to hear one of his well-known recordings from the 50s and you went to hear him in the 60s, the tempo was faster. He had a different saxophonist. And he said repeatedly, "I have to change. It's my curse." Now, contrast that with many of the congregations we may know or remember. How many Presbyterians does it take to change a light bulb? And the answer is change. And so you've got this music that continues to surge forward. And in my blended career as pastor and pianist, I've had to encounter curious questions from both sides. One night, we were out in Erie, Pennsylvania at Wayside Presbyterian Church, played a concert, people are coming up. And the last one in line was my grandmother, who at that point would have been about 96 years old. She hadn't heard me in years. She's on her walker. She lived near the place where we were playing, and she waited patiently for everybody to kind of filter out. And while she stood by the piano, she picked up a single sheet of paper with notation on it. And she stared at it and she said, "How did you play for 7 minutes on one page of paper?" And I just kind of blurted out, "Well, Grandma, they asked me the same question in my church. I stand up and worship, I read 4 or 5 verses out of the Bible, and I go on for 18 more minutes." And it was the same kind of question that they asked of Jesus in the Nazareth synagogue. Where does he get all this stuff? So I think the same skills are basically at work: interpretation and invention. So let me show you another clip. And this is a tune that you may recognize. We recorded with the Christmas version of our band at an NPR, actually it was a PBS recording in our local studio. And we'll talk about this.
songs employ, while fields and floods, rocks, hills, and plains repeat the sounding joy, repeat the sounding joy, repeat, repeat the sounding joy. And sorrows grow, nor thorns infest the ground. He comes to make his blessings flow, far as the curse is found, far as the curse is found, far as the curse is and wonders of his love, and wonders of his love, and wonders of his
All righty. Welcome to what Christmas Eve is like at our place at 11 o'clock at night. Honestly, those are the guys that come by. So you know that tune, and a very simple melody that descends from C to C on an octave scale. And by adding judiciously placed chords, by adding some kind of salsa rhythm to it, by inserting little bits and pieces of fun, like the little snippet of tequila in the piano solo, which was not planned. It just kind of came out like a belch. It just happened. It just happened. First take, no rehearsal. Now we had played it many times before, and because we knew the cameras were on, there were things we talked through in the rehearsal, like, well, we need to have some way to come out of the drum solo back into the last verse, and how are we going to end this rather than to merely fade out? So we had to kind of talk that through, but then we leaned back and let it happen. This is one of the only forms of art making that seems to be communal. And the only analogy I would have for it might be improv theater, where you have a bunch of people who come up with, they create something. You begin with certain expectations, and then you really have to rely on one another to take this forward and provide it some vitality. Um, um, when we cool down at night, if we've been having too much Rachel Maddow, we'll find out, we'll go looking for whose line is it anyway? We'll kind of bring that up and just watch these crazy characters invent something on the fly. And that's something of an analogy of what happens here. The painter paints in isolation. The poet sits on the rocking chair and she bounces metaphors off one another. Various people do things by themselves, but a jazz group is dialoguing in motion around a set number of assumptions. And let me tell you what I think a couple of assumptions are. I've got at least 5. Here's one. What may be written is fine, but what we put in the air could be better. What was written may be fine, but what we could put in the air might be better. Now, you run the risk of arrogance, and you run the risk of falling on your face. There will be people who are traditionalists, however you construe them, who will say, I always liked the way it was, or what was familiar, or what was settled. But this approach to art making, to music making, is assuming that we're going to perform this in the instant, and it runs all kinds of risks. You could have a brain lapse. I am 61 now. I'm having brain lapses. I forget names. I don't know where my car keys are. And you can also have a finger malfunction. That's another risk you run. If you make music with fingers, there might be something that just goes off the rails. There's also kind of an odd thing that happens in a band where the music will be swirling around and all of a sudden you're kind of wondering where the downbeat is. And you're one of the musicians. And all kinds of people do this. I heard a recording with Herbie Hancock, and Joe Henderson with the saxophonist couldn't follow where the piano solo was going. And it was Joe's recording date. So he comes in with his horn and just comes down with 1, and you can hear it. And the band just locks in right with it and goes through it. And they didn't scrap that take of the song. They just kept going. And you might crack open something fresh here. There might be a sign of vitality or resurrection. And it is a signal that we are not robots. We are living, breathing beings with a God-given spark of creativity. And that's one of the assumptions. Another assumption is that the music may have a past, and it certainly is happening in real time, so it has a present tense nature, but does it have a future? Are you going to take this into the future and see where it goes? Well, that's another risky question. I am a Presbyterian minister. I deal with people who like structure, and they're anchored to the tradition. But the question is the tradition alive, and does it have a future? Does it have a trajectory? Does something come forward from this? Or is it basically just repeating the past? I mean, that's a jazz question. About 10 years ago, on the anniversary of a famous jazz recording called Kind of Blue by Miles Davis and the Sextet, some young pups of my acquaintance did a lot of work, and they basically transcribed the entire album and re-recorded it as it was. They basically replayed the solos in the same place, same instrumentation. The piano chords were in the same place, same notes. Everything was identical. And a lot of jazz purists were just furious. You know, you cannot repeat the past. Miles Davis didn't do that with his own music. The past has a future. It's a very, very controversial recording. Here's another assumption. And this one, I think, goes really to the heart of it all. The assumption is there must be more. The assumption is there must be more. And you know as well as I, if you find yourself in a static situation, all the bolts are frozen and they will not move. If you serve an institution that seems to kind of played out, but you still believe that it has a future, then there must be more. And this gets to the whole possibility of divine creativity, not just human creativity, but divine creativity. Over and over again, the Psalms and the book of Revelation once or twice says, sing to the Lord a new song. It doesn't say sing to the Lord old hymn 382, which we like to sing at least 8 times a year. Sing to the Lord a new song. And it's Walter Brueggemann, the Old Testament theologian, who said somewhere that what constitutes the old song, the new song, are bits and pieces of the old song brought forward to this new day. Suggesting, if you look at the piano keyboard, you've got 88 notes, unless you're playing a Bosendorfer, then you have another 10. If you're playing the piano, you have 88 notes, you can see them all. There are no new notes, but there are new rhythms and new configurations. And the assumption here is that there is an inner vitality at work, call it Holy Spirit, call it the power of God, call it the risen Christ, call it whatever you wish, but some force which will not be managed, only welcomed. And this is the source of new life. Now, the hard part about the biblical tradition is the new life might come around like every 5 or 6 or 800 years or so. You know, the divine one does not seem to be in any hurry, which is our primary human lament. But new life does happen. I've enjoyed talking with colleagues to survey the things that have bubbled up during the pandemic, when there were some who thought maybe it's just time to close the church, maybe it's time to just shut down this whole enterprise of faith, maybe we're just cooked and finished and baked and done, and then something else bubbles up. You know, it's I'm a preacher some of the time, and a lot of this has to do with my assumptions when I go to a familiar text of Scripture. Is there something fresh here, or something fresh happening here that could actually bring vitality to me and to other people? Or am I simply kind of going through rote by rote, step by step, what some old commentary told me I should say about the old dead text? Is there anything dynamic here, or are we finished? So that's another assumption. We're going to play Round Midnight by Thelonious Monk. Well, should we do it the way Monk always did it, or should we do something fresh? And you run the risk, of course, if you do something new and fresh or approach it imaginatively, you might lose the moorings of what you're trying to interpret or invent, but you always still have the original source. Here's another assumption. The assumption is, I may have something to offer. And the story here comes back from, I guess it would have been 1983 or 4. I was living in a college town in New Jersey. Across the street from me was the McCarter Theater, and Performing Arts Center in New Jersey. And Oscar Peterson was booked to play the piano. Oscar, they flew in his Bosendorfer from wherever he was playing before, and they sold so many tickets they had to basically bring seats up on stage and surround him. And I was really jealous because I had a balcony seat, and these people are just like right next to his hands. Oscar was a pretty big dude. He was well sized, and he comes out and he's already huffing and puffing a little bit, and he comes out in this tuxedo and he sits down and he plays a double-handed run the whole way up and down just to kind of get a feel of the piano. And then it started. And I had never seen a person with 20 fingers all working in concert and in parallel and independently. I mean, it was the most astounding piano music I've ever heard in my life. 2 hours of this. Tunes I knew were kind of half new, and he was just ripping it up. And I decided in my balcony seat, I would give up playing the piano. How could I do it? It had just been done. There's just no way comparatively I could ever do that, imagine that. I love jazz. I played a little jazz. I could not possibly do this. And about 3 weeks later, when I came out of that cloud, or that fog actually, I realized, well, maybe I have something to offer too. That there are experts, but maybe actually there are no experts. Maybe all of us contribute something. And that's an assumption with jazz. I work a lot with university students to try to get them off the page and into the air. I did it again Monday night for about an hour, and some are terrified, and they shut down because they're afraid they're going to fail, and they don't want to fail in front of a professor. They don't want to fail in front of their peers. But some took a flying leap, and it was pretty good. And it was the first time they had tried this. And it came from some inner kind of direction that maybe there's something I can contribute to this as well. Here's one more assumption. If you're going to do this, you have to embrace the moment. I don't know, that's parlance for all kinds of things, but you have to know right where you are and hear what's going on around you. You need to be incredibly attentive. My spiritual director has told me 1,000 times, including at the farmhouse in Kirkridge, and in next door Bill Cowie's portal into the new earth. He said, you know, you've got to pay attention. That's the heart of the spiritual life. You've got to pay attention. Pay attention to what? You're not paying attention. That would be his retort. And paying attention for a jazz musician is listening as much as anything else. We don't play by ear. We play by internalized knowledge, and we play by risk. But the primary way, the primary appendage in which we perform is not the finger and not the lips if you're a saxophonist or a horn player, but the ear. If the music goes a certain way, you have to decide if you will go with it. And it might be irretrievable, it might go down a track and then it just concludes, but you're paying attention to where this is going. That initial story I told you of Bobby Timmons, he hadn't kept current with what his old friend Coltrane was doing, and Coltrane had pretty much left him in the dust, and I think he was probably mortified at trying to keep up. He just threw in the towel. I'm not going to do this. And in a moment of unprofessional honesty, said, "What are they doing?" Well, embracing the moment has to do with essentially keeping up, keeping current, and paying attention to what's going on. The guitarist Pat Metheny says, if a musician's not listening to what I want to do on my guitar and where the music is moving forward, they will not remain very long in my band. I have to make decisions based on where the vision is taking us forward. And then finally, one more assumption, that if you go down this path of improvisation, it's going to make you sweat. And I don't mean sweat out of anxiety, although there is some of that. I mean, we're talking about a full-bodied immersion into the moment and into the art. Or if I put my preacher hat on for just a second, we're talking about thoroughly incarnate. We are embodying something very, very deep and holy, and we're doing it with some physicality. And my favorite story of this is the night that a world famous trumpeter went to my alma mater, Binghamton University in upstate New York. And he had been rising through the ranks. I will not name him. I would just say, you all know who he is. So he brings this 7-piece band, and they're booked. And because he was a rising star, and he had something called a record company, which now no longer exists, but record companies used to send their stars out, and he could command, I think he was getting $40,000 that night. This was late 80s. It would be 3 times that now. They were booked, and he had added all kinds of riders on his contract. When Mr. So-and-so lands, he will be met at the airport with a white limousine, and there will be 2 beautiful women who will accompany him throughout the evening. And so my buddy Al, who I mentioned before with that Coltrane story, kept crossing out things on the rider. We don't do that here. We, all of this, there are only going to be blue M&Ms in the jar, just all that kind of nonsense. So, so they brought him in, and they rehearsed it, did a sound check. They did a concert. They played an hour of the music of Thelonious Monk, and people stood and applauded, and it was marvelous. And they walked off stage, and they didn't come back. $40,000 for 1 hour of music. But people who were expecting a little bit more, they'd all paid $25, $30 a ticket or more just to hear this astounding young new trumpeter. Not only that, they went out to the limousines and they took off. So the crowd was deflated, to say the least. A few even made it back to the box office to ask for a refund, which was not going to happen. And so some of the hardcore jazzers in the crowd who were looking at this luminous new star as their future decided, well, we'll go over to a local watering hole, which had kind of a weekend trio, and we'll go listen to the local band play some music. And that'll be a night. We'll just have a couple of beers and call it a night. While they're there, this crowd of local jazz aficionados, the 7-piece band walks in with their instruments and say, can we sit in? And they played for free for the next 3 hours without taking a break. And when Al told me the story, he said, that was where the music happened. I got to see them sweat. They weren't doing it for the money. They weren't doing it for the nonsense of show business. They were doing it because they were totally immersed in it, and they couldn't not do it. There was something in them biologically that said, you are a musician, you have to do this. Now, when these assumptions are in place, in jazz, that's where the magic happens. That's where the crowd, including musicians, are vivified, reanimated, energized. It's where something new has broken forth that was not there before. I go back to a story of a 19-year-old woman in 1955 who was taken by her aunt to hear Louis Armstrong at the Latonia Theater in Oil City, Pennsylvania. The ticket that night was $1.85, and that put you up in the balcony, $1.85 a ticket. Aunt Mamie said, "Come on, Betsy, we're just going to go do this." And they put on their nice clothes. They went to hear Louis Armstrong. And the 19-year-old, now my mother, says, all these years later, 65 years later, two things she remembers. One is that Louis Armstrong had a stack of handkerchiefs on the piano, and within 5 minutes he would grab one, dab his forehead, because it was just coming out of him, and he would drop the handkerchief. At the end of the night, there was a stack of handkerchiefs, pile of handkerchiefs on the floor of the stage. And I think these days you could probably sell that DNA for an awful lot of money. The second thing she remembers is the room was transformed. It was, in a molecular way, it was changed. These musicians had come in and they had totally given everything they had, in spite of the circumstances. I mean, it was 1955, Oil City, Pennsylvania. Chances are Louis Armstrong was not able to spend the night at a hotel in that very white town. And he went and made the music anyway. Because, as musicians will often say, the music is more important than me. So let me pause there. We've been at it for a while, and let's unmute, and what do you want to talk about?
Bill, I've just got a burning question that's woven through everything you've said. And I'd made a note earlier, and the question just keeps expanding. But how does, this is a spiritual question, I think. How does the jazz musician avoid the constant danger or temptation of institutionalizing a pattern? I mean, you play the same music more than once, maybe, you know, hundreds of times in a life of a musician. And so what's the discipline you follow to maintain the impermanence? Do you know what I'm saying?
I think it's two things, two disciplines. The first is self-criticism, which, if it's unchecked, is debilitating. But to listen to oneself honestly, to discern the patterns, to decide, are they good resting places, plateaus, or can I push myself beyond that? So self-discipline and kind of critique. And I don't remember what the second one was going to be because I'm 61. But I think there's kind of an ongoing review of your work and a realization that sometimes it flies and other times it flops, and that's just the nature of what we do. So I had a friend by the name of Brubeck, and I went over to Connecticut to see him one day, and we're talking. Just gotten back from 15 dates in Europe. This is in the late 90s. I said, "How did it go?" He said, "We had a couple of good nights." Now, he had a Lifetime Grammy Award, and he had a couple of good nights. Now, I know what often gets released in recordings is the best of the work you've done. There's a filter in that sense. A producer helps you decide that. But conversely, sometimes the best work you do in a recording studio is the first or second take. Which is astounding to me. But what happens is if you're trying to force the imagination, that sometimes is where it falls flat. So I think, Gail, some of the patterns are inevitable. Goodness, I've got things that I fall into in certain kind of chord sequences or such, or certain kind of tunes. But we're always trying to reach through it and beyond it. And it's more than your own effort. John Coltrane's music shifted. It kind of peaked in 1959 with his with playing with Miles Davis, but also his Giant Steps record. He just could play anything, and the chords were coming at you like just one after another. And by 1961, he had simplified the music, and he was basically just floating on top of it. And it was, I think, the old Reformation paradigm of he had moved from works to grace. At least that's what I bring to it. I guess I read too many books, but there's that kind of sense that, okay, you've got the skills under your fingers. Now just let it fly and see what happens. And maybe it will be a good night. Yeah, I was astounded that Dave Brubeck would critique his own playing. But I guess I shouldn't have been. So I think that's one answer.
Just a very quick follow-up.
Yeah.
The thing is, though, when it really does fly and you say, oh, that was good, what saves you from the temptation of just repeating it? Like in so many churches, we find what works and we keep doing it, you know?
Well, I think there's got to be a kind of a freedom, internal freedom to try things, but also the kind of freedom that you understand that everything in this life is transitory. We are pilgrims in exile moving toward a destination we can't see yet. And I think there's that kind of sense in this too. As a fellow preacher, I love that story Fred Craddock used to tell, where he would stand in the door before he went out somewhere, door of his hotel or something, and said, I've been ordained to preach the imperishable word of God to a congregation that might not even know it's drowning. Here goes nothing. And it's the here goes nothing that saves it from arrogance. It's like, I'm going to do what I can. And that also frees us to let the holy fill in the gaps and make more of it. It's like the person who gives a speech and everybody comes up afterwards and says, you have a copy of that. And a copy is handed over and they look at the page and they say, well, where's the rest of it? So I think that's why this is so engaging. I can apply it to church leadership and jazz and in preaching and writing and working with people, and also understanding when I have conversations with people who are in distress or difficulty. When the conversation's over, I haven't fixed them and they're not done yet. But we have a relationship and we're moving into the future. And some nights it's a good night.
I have a thought too, Bill, about, well, I'm wondering where this might take you. As I think about my own life and reflection in my life, I'm often in a place of holding the tension of opposites. It's one of the things I love most about jazz as an art form and freedom, like the tension of both of those things, and leading and following. Everybody in a jazz ensemble is doing both of those things, leading and following, the familiar and the unknown. So it being together and playing together as an ensemble, and also risking to step out alone. Like, so the tension of those opposites, it seems to me that jazz as an art form really holds many of those same opposites.
Mhm. It does. It does. And just as I was saying with Gail, there needs to be some kind of self-critical reflection, even group reflection, to keep things from getting stale. I was able to snooker some grant money out of my county last fall to put on 3 concerts in the winter. We did an afternoon of Brubeck music for Dave's 100th birthday in December. We did an afternoon of Beethoven with 3 friends who play chamber music. And then we did a concert just last month of some music from the Blue Note record label. And I said to the guys, now they said, anything you want us to know? And I said, well, have fun, but by all means, don't let the first solo be a trumpet solo. Because if you listen to some of those old records, almost every first solo is a trumpet, and then a tenor, and then a piano, and then maybe the bass and maybe the drums, which you experienced actually in the first cut. I mean, as Wynton Marsalis would say, the primary reason to play the trumpet is in order to be heard. Yeah, just ask a trumpeter that. But to be able to kind of mix up the form and yet know that what you're working with is ever malleable. What I find fun is to go to hear a musician play one of their great tunes and they do it in a fresh way. And I still recognize it, but it's a fresh way. I love Bruce Hornsby, the Virginia singer-songwriter, had some top 10 hits. He has a jazz pedigree, University of Miami. He never does anything hardly the second way twice. I mean, he just continues to evolve the music. I also love James Taylor, but whenever I go see James Taylor, which is as frequently as I can, everybody in the band has ear monitors in, and they're playing along to a click track, so the tempo is never faster than usual. It's kind of like a white middle class overbite, hey honey, how you doing? Everything's mellow, which has its appeal, especially on date night for us. But after, it's like too much chocolate cake. There isn't enough freedom. It's all form. So yeah, I think you've nailed a dynamic that just needs to be held. And Rob, were you raising your hand? Do you have something you want to jump in, say?
No, that was just a thumbs up for Bruce Hornsby.
Bruce Hornsby. Yeah, he's great. He's great. And singing great and playing unbelievably well.
May I ask a question?
Yes, Holly, please.
Thank you. I'm just enjoying this, by the way. Thank you so much. Such rich information. Integration is the word that keeps coming into my heart. And thinking of what you do, integrating the clergy and the music, and thinking about what really moves me, and I'm not burned out. It's like, I love my work in the church.
Right.
Because I do feel that bringing freshness, newness, questioning is a big thing in spirituality. Like, we don't have all the answers, and I'm very attracted to a theology that really embodies that, in their preaching and their music and the worship experiences, and then taking it into the daily life. And so I want to ask you like 50 questions, which would take hours. So I'm going to try to.
I have to be home, I have to be home for dinner at 7, so I'm here.
All right, honey, we're talking. So my I want to narrow it down to one, I guess, that I don't know, is how have you, in your many years of experience in living in both worlds, how have you integrated this idea of jazz or improvisation into your worship experience, maybe with your music director or on your own, maybe even your preaching style? And then how have you sort of embodied that and modeled it for your congregation so they could take that out into the world, that art of improvisation?
Mhm. Okay.
I don't know if that says what I want to say.
How long do we have here?
Right, I know.
Yeah.
I was trying to sort of like encapsulate. You could touch upon one of those things. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a 36-year work in progress.
Yeah.
And again, what had to awaken in me is a sense that things could be integrated, that it wasn't a binary decision, A or B. It wasn't pastoral ministry or jazz. It was yes. And I remember sitting in the rusty scupper of Princeton, New Jersey with Fred Anderson of Madison Avenue Church saying, you're going to have to decide between music and ministry. And I said, well, you did, but I think that's a false dichotomy. And he ordered another scotch and we went on from there, which was, I think, the only thing he could have done. But it's that kind of working through day by day. I think what Diane raised about form and freedom is absolutely essential.
Yeah.
And I just finished the new biography on Eugene Peterson, who I resonate with because he spent 30 years in a single parish, kind of working it out there. He wasn't going to climb a ladder and say, I'm going to go to a bigger church or a more important thing. He's going to work out his issues where he was, which is the decision I made after a divorce in '98 when I had a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old to raise. And I thought, yeah, I could go on to this place or that place, but I need to work it out where I am. So that rootedness really helps. The first couple of jazz services we did, we had people disappear. Regulars disappear. That's not my kind of music.
Sure.
And I said, okay, first of all, non-anxious. Do I care? Yeah, but I'm not going to show it. I'm just going to be professionally non-anxious. Thank you. See you next week, I hope. Oh yeah, we'll be here, but not for that. I mean, we have a couple recovering fundamentalist Baptists in our church. And last number of years, I've been doing jazz services on Labor Day weekend where we take a different musician. So we did Keith Jarrett, and that was on emphasis on beauty. And we did one on Thelonious Monk, and that was on creativity. And we got to Charlie Parker, and that was on Ecclesiastes and the foolishness of chasing after, the vanity of chasing after smoke, whether it's pot smoke or whatever other smoke he was reaching for at the time. That by pursuing the pleasures of this world, they don't really kind of satisfy. And the Baptists missed that day. They were just afraid Satan was going to come in through the stained glass windows. And so a track record of this, I just stay at it and gently. But the form and freedom paradigm that Diane holds, we talk about, for instance, we used to have monthly meetings of our board, our session. About 10 years ago, we did a little study. Do we really need 12 meetings a year? No, actually, we could get by with 8, maybe 9. Maybe a coffee hour meeting to approve a budget we already agreed to. Okay, then why don't we do that? Somebody said, can we do that? Well, let's give it a try and see how it works. We can always change. So there's a malleability to this and a shifting. Continue on with Presbyterian elders who can be as fixed as they come. We decided that we were hearing complaints that when they came onto the board in January, they were inheriting, a third of them were inheriting a budget they had never had any ownership of. I said, well, what if we move the term to June 1st to May 31st? Can we do that? why not? We might have to change the bylaws, but we can do this. We can stay fresh and responsive to what's going on. And one way that bubbled up in the last year and a half, when George Floyd was murdered, my congregation wanted to talk about it. And we talked about it on Zoom. We read books. We got Henry Louis Gates' most recent book we've just read on the Black Church, but also the one about Reconstruction. We did kind of our homework together, and we literally prayed our way through it. As a white church in a white suburban town in Pennsylvania, how can we be responsive and responsible? That could not have happened if we hadn't learned about flexibility and vulnerability, which is the word I've not named yet, but that's at the heart of all this.
Yes.
Am I willing to take that risk to be honest?
Mm.
Which, with singing with Bobby, when he pulls you into the circle and hands you that microphone, it's like, holy God, what are we going? Yeah,
Vulnerability.
I was there in 2013 and 2014 at Omega, and it opened me up.
Yeah. So beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you. I love vulnerability. I'm sticking with that. That is really, I think, what's going to save us as a species.
Well, yeah,
if we can open our hearts and across the world, across faith traditions, I think this jazz, this improvisation gives us elements that, as my yoga teacher would say, you take off the mat. How do you put it into your real life? And with the circle singing, and for those of you who might not know this Bobby McFerrin circle singing thing, when I do circle singing, when I'm in a circle with Bobby or I'm teaching it, it's all about listening.
Yeah.
So like I've always said with Bobby, I always joke, I said, let's go to House and Senate. We're on road trip. Let's do some circle singing with the House and Senate, because it's about listening. You cannot make progress.
Right.
You cannot be fresh in the moment and create the next notes and create the next, what's the next best thing? We can go for 40 minutes and sing a circle song on like 3 notes, and it's magic and it changes your life. Just think about.
Well, and let's broaden it. What it creates is that it creates community.
Amen.
I have conversations with my bass player buddy, Tony Marino, who lives between here and Kirkridge in the Poconos.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll be driving somewhere and we'll talk about how far do you go on the continuum of art and accessibility, meaning do you go to high art that's going to leave a lot of your listeners in the dust, or do you give them something also they can snap their feet to?
Mm-hmm.
And there's got to be that's another part of the dialectic here, because he's worked very, very hard at kind of the esoteric end of the tradition. But if he's playing with Dave Liebman, his frequent boss, NEA jazz master, there might be 15 people in the club. And Lieb said to me one time, "Hey, Rev, how do you get so many people in church to listen to jazz?" I said, "I try to meet them."
Thank you. I think that's a beautiful answer.
I try to meet them, and I try to, let's go on a journey together. Maybe I'm going to challenge you. For me, it's always the second tune and the second set after we've worn them over a little bit. Then we're going to give them something really, really challenging. The song I wrote 8 years ago about gun violence in the Columbia Mall of Maryland. Here it is, and it's ugly, but so was gun violence. And then we're going to come out of that, and maybe I'll give you an old hymn, and we'll kind of do something. So again, it's think about programming for a journey, which is part of the responsibility for the artist is too. You can't just make a statement. You've got to meet the people.
Right. And you can't meet them unless you listen.
Yeah. Amen.
And at that point, that's a really wonderful place to kind of call this one to a close. And Bill,
thank you.
I haven't taken so many notes in a long time. I'm just like, I feel really full, and I have almost 2 pages. Yeah. So I knew. So So there was something in my knowing, and I'm so delighted to be with you, and all of us. Thank you for all the connections that you've made, because they're the deep universal connections.
Let
And
me
we're
tell
going to
people,
go and improv together. Yes, tell us
let
what's
me tell
coming up,
people where
we're
this is
heading.
coming from, and
Maybe.
where it's going to go. I've been working at this for many, many years, but I was supposed to take a pastoral sabbatical last summer to write a book about all this material. And of course, COVID dashed that. And I've insisted I'm going to take it this summer and have some grant funding from the Louisville Institute, have done a lot of research. It's been kind of fun, actually, have a more spacious year to call up musicians on the phone, interview them and such. So you heard a lot of the chapter in development on improvisation. The next two, one will be on racism, and particularly introduce you to Dave Brubeck's response to racism. Expand your palette of music that you might not have known that he ever did, or decisions he made that were a way of witnessing and accompanying the oppressed, which I think is something. And then the other one I've been thinking about is called Broken but Beautiful. And in jazz history, there is a long list of broken people, which is why the former Baptists didn't want to spend a morning in worship hearing the music or reflections on Charlie Parker, much less Ecclesiastes. Thank you very much. That book's not in their Bible. But let's consider how, what does it really mean to be human? And just as we've heard, we hold form and function together in kind of dialectic. We also hold together beauty and pain together in kind of a dialectic. And they speak to one another. So that's where we're going. Yeah, I will warn you, there are some harrowing stories I will probably tell you that night, but all toward the point of claiming what it means to be a beautiful creation of God, whose beauty shines through with the brokenness. And what does that look like? So, or better yet, how does that sound? So that's
Those times, yep. So we're looking at the next two Thursday nights, the 22nd of April and the 29th of April. And the biggest favor you could do is to go tell a friend this is the best thing you've heard since sliced bread, and gather people who might appreciate this conversation. So Bill, I cannot thank you enough. Just so grateful that you said yes. And thank you, Gail and Diane, for kind of being the wingman for me. And we will see you all in a week or so. And please spread the word. Thank you again, Bill. It was a wonderful night.
Thank you, Kirkridge.
Thank you, everyone. Beautiful, beautiful night. Be well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Holly. Nice to see you.
Good to see
Fred,
you.
you look like you love this.
That's not a strong enough word, Gene.
Okay.
I think it was standing on holy ground through Zoom. I took my shoes off.
Thank you. Thank you.
Fred's a pastor up in Ontario and on our board.
I already texted Fred and said, or chatted Fred and said, I can tell you were drinking the Kool-Aid or something.
Don't do that.
And we could have done it all night, really.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well,
Bill.
so the next time that we're able to do an in-person jazz program with Bill, we'll hope that you can get across the border, Fred, because it's
That would be nice if they'd open it up. I'll bring the scotch.
Okay, that's good. We know that you will bring a good bottle.
Yeah, we can't meet without you. Oh, so much
you all.
gratitude. It was, yeah, rushing and rushing and rushing and rushing and rushing to get here. And then like, it was like I just dropped into a deep well, a deep and beautiful well. So thank you.
All right.
Got to ask you, Bill, have you run across Tom Reynolds?
Paul Reynolds, no.
Tom Reynolds, he's a piano
No.
player. Also the vice principal of Emmanuel College in Toronto. Really fine piano player.
Not yet. I spoke at the Anglican Cathedral in Toronto. It would have been like 2000. It was before 9/11, I think. And I'm trying to remember the names of the folks who brought me in, but they did essentially a hootenanny. It was unbelievable, the Toronto musicians that came in. And it was a fun time. Beautiful city. Best Indian food I think I've ever had outside of Glasgow.
Right.
So much joy. Thank you. Thank you, Bill and Jean and Gail. Thank you all. It was just a really wonderful night. I look forward to seeing you in a couple of next week.
Next week. Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
Bye.
Take care.
Take care, y'all.
Bye-bye.
And
Bye-bye.
Bill,
Have a good dinner.
a final note, Bill, Fred Anderson was my classmate at
Ah,
Princeton.
Okay.
And sometime I'll tell you the story of our enforced different styles in the classroom as students. You'll appreciate it.
Yeah. Gene,
Thank
you might
you
want to
for
turn off
tonight.
the recorder for that. Oh, he's
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Here,
he's a trip.
I will.
He's a
Thank you.
trip. Well, you know, he's a tenor.